The Jets have a clear need at quarterback this offseason, and there are not many good options available. So, should the team look to make a major move and trade up to the top of the first round for one of the top prospects? It's probably not a great idea, and I'll explain why today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Wednesday, February 19th, 2025, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day, and a big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Today we have our weekly mailbag show. Each Wednesday we try to do a mailbag with listener questions, and let's begin with our first question. It's about the Jets quarterback situation. John, I'm not seeing a lot of obvious options available for the Jets in free agency or the trade market. Should the team maybe look to trade to the top of the first round for either Shedeur Sanders or Cam Ward? That might be the only solution I see to addressing the quarterback position. Well, I understand the perspective because, as you mentioned, there are really not many great options at the quarterback position. But first of all, I think it's unlikely the Jets are going to look to trade up because that requires the teams at the top of the draft to be willing to trade down. And that's not always the case. I'm not sure what the teams at the top of the draft want to do, but there are a lot of quarterback needy teams at the top of the draft. So that's number one. And I think we always talk about the Jets at this time of year. We always talk about the Jets. Well, they should trade up or they should trade down. But of course it takes two to tango, and other teams aren't always willing to make moves. I think if you look at the recent history of teams trading up for quarterbacks. First of all, there are lots of stories of failure. And when you trade up for a quarterback, you're typically paying a premium. You're paying a ridiculous amount. You think about what the Panthers traded to move up for Bryce Young. I mean, you can go back, back to 2016, what the Rams traded for Jared Goff, for what the Eagles traded for Carson Wentz. You want to go back to 2012, you could talk the RG3 trade between Washington and the Rams. You're usually paying a premium. And frequently what happens in these situations, and Carolina is a good example, is that you pay such a high price that you struggle to surround the quarterback with the right pieces. And, you could even talk about the Jets in 2018 when they traded up from 6 to 3. And I'd say they traded up for Sam Darnold, but at the point the Jets made the trade, nobody really knew who the Jets were going to be able to take. I mean, at the time, it felt like the Jets were trading up for Baker Mayfield because everybody that year thought Darnold was going to go number one overall to Cleveland. Well, the Jets traded up 3 slots. They gave up 3 second-round picks, which ended up really costing them and ended up playing a big role as to why the Jets could not surround Sam Darnold with the right pieces. So I think that a lot of these trades, when you move up for a quarterback, are losers. If this regime absolutely fell in love with a quarterback prospect, I could understand them drafting them if they're available at 7, but I think a trade up is not conducive for success for the Jets right now. I think this is a team that really needs to focus on building the other pieces around the quarterback, because I really do feel like if you draft a quarterback this year, you're going to be right back to, especially if you trade up for a quarterback, you're going to be right back to where you were, where we've always been with this team, where you have a new coach, a new GM. Now there's going to be all this pressure to put the quarterback on the field, whether or not he's ready, especially if you trade up for him. And I think one thing that's important to note is you don't always need to have your next 10 years planned out at the quarterback position. You don't always need to know exactly which direction you're going in. The Detroit Lions right now, one of the league's model franchises, they have Jared Goff at quarterback, and they're comfortable with Jared Goff right now. But I don't know that Jared Goff is necessarily their long-term quarterback. He's like their medium-term quarterback. They're going to go with him until they find somebody they like better. They probably will, in the next couple of years, identify a prospect they really like and draft that guy. He'll probably be a guy that's perceived to have a higher ceiling than Goff, and maybe Goff's a guy that can get you to a certain place, and they'll be looking for that guy that can get them over that hump. Kind of what the Chiefs did when all the years they had Alex Smith playing quarterback, lots of playoff berths, lots of winning season, lots of division titles, but they could never really go on the deep run until they got Mahomes. So, with the Jets, you're probably not winning the Super Bowl in 2025. What you're looking to do is just turn the franchise around. You're looking to have a positive season. And, I do think that there are some options out there which are not the most exciting options in the world, but there are options that can give you decent quarterback play. What you should be looking for the Jets to do if you're the Jets is what Minnesota did. Well, I shouldn't say what Minnesota did because they did draft a quarterback, but the model should be like finding a Sam Darnold, where you buy low on a guy with ability and put him in the right situation, and then you succeed. And what you should avoid is getting this year's version of Sam Darnold, the guy that's going to get paid a lot of money, the guy that's going to get paid too much based on what he did last year. Sam Darnold this year is not a guy you want because he's just going to make way too much money. You want there are certain quarterbacks out there who, if you put them in a decent situation, they'll succeed. If you put them in a bad situation, they'll fail. Darnold's one of them. These guys you buy low on. You don't buy high. You don't buy the Sam Darnold 2024 free agency. You buy the Sam Darnold 2023 that only cost you $10 million. And what I'm looking for in free agency for the Jets is a quarterback who, there's a plausible path to this guy being better than you think. Justin Fields is a good example. I think Justin Fields is one of the better. There are no great options, and people are going to scoff at these options, but that's part of the reason they make sense for the Jets is that these are guys where you don't love them right now because they're not coming off the greatest season, but there's something there that suggests they could be a bargain. Justin Fields is a guy who's been very inconsistent through his career. When he's been good, though, he's been very good, and there's a lot of ability there. What's interesting with Justin Fields is that a lot of times quarterbacks with great running ability rely on their legs too much. And Justin Fields is like the rare case of a quarterback with great running ability who doesn't always take the opportunities in front of him to use his legs. I mean, he's a guy who should run more frequently. He's a guy who, when he's been good, he's been very good. Unfortunately, those stretches haven't been as consistent as you want, but he's a guy, he's still young enough where maybe the pieces can click. There are some veteran options out there. And I know nobody's excited about the idea of Kirk Cousins, but Kirk Cousins, realistically, the worst case scenario for him, if he stays healthy, is probably around the level of play you got from Aaron Rodgers last year. And there's potential, if in the right system, if you put him in a good system, which you're hoping Tanner Engstrand puts in, he could get back maybe closer to the level he was at in Minnesota, where he was a very productive quarterback. And the big thing with Cousins, I wouldn't be interested in him, but he's only going to cost $1.2 million. And that's because he's kind of got the Russell Wilson situation where Atlanta's paying his salary, and any dollar the new team pays Cousins is just one less dollar Atlanta has to pay him. So Cousins makes no more. So Cousins is going to sign for the league minimum because there are what are known as offsets in the deal. So if any team pays Cousins $3 million, Cousins doesn't really make extra money because that just reduces Atlanta's obligation by the same $3 million. So he's going to be able to sign for the veteran minimum. And at that, if he's free, I mean, it might be worth it. Derek Carr, who we talked a lot about 2 years ago, he quietly coming off a pretty good season with the Saints. I mean, his issue was injuries, but he actually played pretty well for the Saints this past year. The Jets are not going to have top 10 quarterback play next year. And by the way, that was true even if Aaron Rodgers came back, because Aaron Rodgers is not a top 10 quarterback anymore. And Aaron Rodgers' level of play is a lot closer to the level of Derek Carr and Kirk Cousins right now than it is Patrick Mahomes and Joe Burrow. But I think that, you're looking for somebody who can surprise you in a pleasant way. And I think there are options out there. If you look at their narrative, if you look at their career arcs, there are some options out there that could surprise you in a pleasant way and come for relatively cheap. And I really think it right now for this team, for this Jets team, the move is to build up the rest of the roster, establish, that things are turned around. I think with this particular franchise at this particular point in time, throwing a rookie quarterback in there is going to be a tough thing to do. And I don't know that's necessarily the thing that's most conducive for success right now for the New York Jets. Now, had you on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll turn to the draft. If the Jets aren't taking a quarterback and they're not trading up, should they maybe trade down? Or is there a prospect that might be just too good to consider a trade down? I have some thoughts on that, and I'll give them to you as we continue here on this Wednesday mailbag edition of Locked On Jets. This is a message from our sponsor, Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back, and then waiting, wondering, and worrying some more. Now Taxes is matching with a TurboTax tax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return, while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find you every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. All so you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now this is Taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service, real-time updates only in iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at turbotax.com/guarantees. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listener, first watch every day. Big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Let's continue now with our weekly mailbag. Our next question. John, it feels like many Jets fans have been hoping for a big trade down in the draft so we can accumulate draft capital for the next decade. Do you think this is the year we finally do it? Are there any prospects you think are too good to pass up on? So great question there. And look, if you're a longtime listener to the show, you know that generally speaking, I'm a big fan of trading down because one of the things that's been proven through the years is that you win a lot more when you trade down than when you trade up. And that's like very counterintuitive because a very popular mindset in the NFL is that when you see a guy who's super talented, you go get him and you don't care about the price. But the draft is a very inexact science. I mean, it's very difficult to project how prospects are going to turn out. So generally speaking, the more chances you give yourself to find a good player, the better off you are, even if you're picking a little bit lower. I think that the odds are probably higher than they've been in the past because when you have a new regime, they tend to be more insulated from criticism, and you get criticized for trading down. I mean, even when like Joe Douglas and Mike McCagnon would trade down on day 3 of the draft, there would be a freak out in the fan base. And that was day 3. Nobody likes trading down. And it's one of the things about the NFL is that frequently the things that are good for your team are the things that get you criticized in the media. And the things that are bad for your team are the things that get you praise. You know, it's kind of like nutrition in a way. It's like the healthy foods don't always taste good in the moment, but you appreciate eating them later on. And the junk foods taste great in the moment, but they don't do good things for you, in the long run. It's kind of a similar concept of the NFL. But first-year GM, first-year head coach, they have about as much political capital as they're ever going to get. They have, they don't really. Fans of the media are going to be very hesitant to criticize them no matter what they do that first year or so. So it's an opportunity to replenish the well. And look, the Jets have given away a lot of draft picks the last 2 years. And the thing is that you don't really notice a lack of draft picks until 2-3 years down the line, because the first year, if you're lucky, you get contributions. But 2022, like the 2022 Jets draft class, where you have 4 immediate contributors, that doesn't happen all that often. Most of the time, guys, you really start to feel the contributions year 2, year 3. And this is the point where the Jets are going to start to feel, those draft picks that have been lacking in 2023. In 2024. And the Jets still have a pick going out for Devontae Adams. They have a pick going out for Hassan Reddick. The Hassan Reddick pick doesn't go out till next year. So that Hassan Reddick trade will still be hurting the Jets in 2026. They're truly incredible stuff. Is there a prospect who's too good to pass on? Now, I don't know if there's any prospect that's too good to pass on. Is there any prospect who's too good to trade down for? Now, I think that one of the reasons that trade downs get criticized is that fans are always terrified, and media is always terrified that you're passing up a superstar when you trade down. And look, you never want to pass up on like a generational talent. I hate the word generational, but you never want to pass up on a generational talent in a trade down. It very rarely happens that you pass up on a generational talent. And most of the time, even when you trade down, even if you do pass up on a great player, you have the opportunity to get a great player with a lower pick. But I'll tell you, the guy I really like, if he's there, is Mason Graham. I just love the idea of pairing Quinn Williams with another outstanding defensive tackle, because a defensive tackle gets double teamed on every play. The offense can only double team one of the 2 defensive tackles. So you got Mason Graham and Quinn Williams there. That means every single snap, either Mason Graham or Quinn Williams is going to get a one-on-one, because you can only double team one of them. 5 offensive linemen, 4 defensive linemen. So you're putting yourself in a great position. And I also love, I think that's like the perfect age gap between Mason Graham and Quinn Williams, because Graham's going to come into the league, and I'm sure he'll play well, but he's not going to be in his prime yet. Quinn Williams is in his prime. So Quinn Williams can kind of be the top guy. Then as Quinn Williams ages, I think Quinn Williams is going to have a graceful aging curve because of just the way he plays. He wins on technique, he wins on refinement. So I don't think he's going to have a rough aging curve the way somebody who only wins on athleticism would. But as Quinn Williams ages, he'll start to decline. That's right when we're entering Mason Graham's prime. So it's like the perfect age gap between these two guys. And I think that if you build your defense around two outstanding defensive tackles, I mean, that's a tough thing for the offense to count because you can't really scheme away from winning in the interior. The offenses can't. It's tough to scheme around that as an offense when you have two guys you can't block on the inside. It's a great way to build a defense. So I guess he'd be the guy I'd be most hesitant to pass on from trading down. It depends on as always, though, it depends on what the offer is. Our next question is also on the on that topic, defensive tackle position. Defensive tackle is a giant hole next to Quinn Williams and not many on the roster. Did Leonard Taylor show enough last year that you can pencil him into next year's projected 4-man rotation? I think that question was phrased perfectly because if the question was, do I think Leonard Taylor showed enough that he should be the starter next to Quinn Williams? My answer would be no. Leonard Taylor was a rookie last season. He was an undrafted free agent the Jets signed out of the University of Miami, and he was one of the standouts of the preseason and got some reps in the regular season. And I thought for an undrafted rookie really held his own. So I don't think he's ready to be a starter. I wouldn't want to count on him to be a starter. But in the 4-man rotation, can he be like your number 4 defensive tackle? That guy that gets the fourth most snaps. Do I think he's shown enough to do that? Yeah, I do. I think you look back on him. This is probably going to go down as one of Joe Douglas's better undrafted free agent signings. Now, it won't be the best because that would be Bryce Huff. But I think this was a really good find for the Jets. And when you're talking about a guy who was an undrafted free agent signing, if you find a rotational defensive tackle who can play effectively on a limited snap basis, that's a heck of a find when you talk about UDFAs. So yeah, I do think he can be like a number 4 defensive tackle. And the thing I say about guys like this is, in a situation like this, you don't want to put a guy into a situation where he has to do more than you're comfortable with him doing. So if you put him in as the number 2 defensive tackle and he handles that role, well, that's what you were expecting. If he doesn't, then you're in big trouble. If you put him as the number 4 defensive tackle, he could probably handle that job effectively. I mean, look, he's probably getting snaps that went to Solomon Thomas. I mean, he's probably going to do better than Solomon Thomas did. But if he shows he can do more, then hey, that's a good problem to have. If he shows he can do more, you can adjust. You can say, okay, we'll give you more snaps then, and then it's a bonus. So I like treating guys like this. Over, under promise and over deliver. You put them in the position to under promise and over deliver, where you're not expecting much. You'll give him this role. If he performs better, then hey, you've got a nice little bonus there instead of like demanding that he be great. And then if he's not great, you're in trouble. Yes, I do think he can be. I do think he's shown he could be a rotational guy. I wouldn't extend him any past that. And if he shows he can do more, because look, he's a young guy. He's still got room to improve. He's still got time to develop his game. If he shows he can do more, well, that's a pretty good situation to be in. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll turn our attention to another player the team brought in 2024. This was a draft pick, Jordan Travis. What's been going on with him and what should we expect heading into 2025? Well, we'll talk about it continuing here on this Wednesday mailbag edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better way to get in on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because with FanDuel, you can place live bets through the games, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in on the action. If you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. You'll love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. When you're backing your team for a late-game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch 3, you'll never feel like you missed your chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. And right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the National Basketball Association. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Wednesday. We're doing our weekly mailbag show. Our next question comes from Jerry, who writes, have you heard any updates or details on Jordan Travis's quote-unquote setback last year during his rehab? Not sure what he is or how he will be as an NFL quarterback, but I like the pick when he was drafted and sure would like to see him in OTAs and the preseason. The Jets have been kind of secretive about what happened with Jordan Travis, but my understanding was that he was never really expected to be back last year. I mean, I think my impression that I got from the Jets was that the expectation was always that 2024 would just be a rehab season for him. It was a very serious injury he suffered at Florida State in 2023, which ended his college career. And I think at least my understanding of it was that if he got back on the practice field for the Jets in 2024, it was a bonus, that it wasn't an expectation. So the Jets have been kind of elusive about what's been going on with Jordan Travis. But I think the pick it was kind of a lottery ticket. And I think the other thing to understand about Jordan Travis, I mean, part of the reason he fell as far as he did in the draft was that injury and the expectation that 2024 was going to kind of be a lost season. Not that Jordan Travis was ever going to be on the field or play a major role for the Jets last year, but he's a developmental player. And the thing about a developmental player is you only develop on the practice field. You want to get on the practice field. So in an ideal world, Jordan Travis would have been on the practice field last year, but I think we all understand he was coming off an injury. And I think, again, the impression I got was that that was always the plan, and that anything they got on him, any moment they got on him, they got him on the practice field was kind of a bonus. Now, the thing with Travis is that we don't really know where this new regime stands on him. When there's a regime change, a guy like Jordan Travis is suddenly on the bubble, because he is not the project of Darren Muji and Aaron Glenn. He was the project of Joe Douglas and Robert Saleh. So Travis essentially comes in with a clean slate. And if Jordan Travis comes in and impresses Glenn and Muji, then he might be able to move on. But I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that the Jets may draft somebody day 3 this year and find a new project and move on from Travis. I think a lot of this comes down to how good Travis is. I mean, I think when you have a new regime, one of the things that's good is that nobody's on scholarship anymore. The guys, everybody's got a clean slate. And that's one of the refreshing things when you hire a new coach and a new GM, is that, and this I think this is true of every coach. This is true of like successful coaches. This is true of coaches who built dynasties. When you're in a place long enough, you develop guys who are favorites, and you develop blind spots for certain players. Solomon Thomas is a perfect example of this under Robert Saleh, where I understood why the Jets signed Solomon Thomas the first year, because Saleh thought, it was 2022. He was a year into his system. And he said, I probably should have signed some guys familiar with my system last year who could kind of be coaches on the field, who could help implement the system. So he was trying to kind of right a wrong. But after that, Solomon Thomas got way too many snaps. He should not have been on the team. But that's what happened. It happens with even coaches who build dynasties. You could go through the list. There are just certain players that coaches attach themselves to, where their performance really does not justify it. And when you have a new coaching staff come in, everybody's got a clean slate. If you go out and play well, you earn the respect of the new coaching staff. If you don't, then the coaching staff moves on. So Jordan Travis, I think has to prove himself this year. But yes, I do agree. It would be good to get him on the field in OTAs in the preseason. First of all, so that you can see what he can do. But second of all, I think those are important reps. And our last question is from Taylor. John, given the Jets' never-ending starting quarterback dilemma, do you agree with the approach that the team should draft a quarterback every year, hoping one eventually hits, even if it's just a late rounder? It seems like a low-risk, high-reward strategy that makes more sense than, say, drafting a 6th-round safety. What are your thoughts? Well, Taylor, you're in good company with that thought, because that was actually the philosophy of a GM who's in the Hall of Fame named Ron Wolf, who had a long career in the NFL as an executive. He worked with the Raiders. He worked with the Buccaneers, actually spent a brief stint with the Jets in their front office in the early 90s, but then went to the Green Bay Packers and built a team that won Super Bowl 31. And with the Packers, Wolf developed a philosophy of drafting a quarterback every single year. And the Packers actually drafted some guys who turned into good quarterbacks. They drafted a lot of guys who turned into starting quarterbacks in the league under Ron Wolf. Mark Brunell, who most notably went on to start with the Jacksonville Jaguars. Matt Hasselbeck, who turned into a quality starting quarterback with the Seattle Seahawks. Even guys like Aaron Brooks, who wasn't that great, but did have a couple of years as a starter with the New Orleans Saints. You can go down the list. Packers drafted a quarterback every year. Wolf's philosophy was built. He's discussed this. There was a game the Packers played, I think it was in Minnesota in the early 90s, where they suffered a couple injuries at quarterback, and Wolf came to realize they lost the game. Wolf came to realize the value of quarterback depth. So his view was we should draft a quarterback every single year. and just keep trying to develop guys. Your odds of hitting on a quarterback are low, and that's true as you get deeper into the draft. But the reward is so great. And the thing is, like in the 6th round, you develop a guy who turns into a quality backup. That's still a very good use of a 6th round pick, even if the odds are low. So, you talk about the expected return. Maybe the odds aren't great of hitting on a quarterback, but the rewards are out of this world good. The one thing I think you need, though, is if you're going to continue to invest draft picks at the quarterback position, you should make sure you have an extra 6th round pick every year, because every pick that goes to a quarterback is depriving your team at other spots. And if you're using a pick on a quarterback every year, you know that a lot of those picks aren't going to pan out. So you should make sure to add extra picks late in the draft, add extra late round picks, so they kind of become bonus. So they kind of become lottery tickets where you take your shot every year. But yeah, I think the principle is good. And I think the league is weird in the standpoint that everybody understands quarterback's the most important position on the field, but everybody's afraid to actually invest in it. Everybody's afraid to turn over every stone and look for a quarterback. And I think that's something I think it's a mindset that's really damaging. And the weirdest thing is, if a team ever focuses on quarterback depth, they get criticized. If a team ever invests in a backup quarterback, they get crushed. But then if your starting quarterback gets hurt and you haven't invested in the backup quarterback, then you get crushed again. So you should be looking to turn over every stone at the quarterback position, I think. And I think that's a great philosophy. I don't know why more teams haven't adopted it. I'm not sure there's any team that's adopted it. It's the Ron Wolf method. Now, one of the things that helped the Packers in the 90s is Mike Holmgren was their head coach. And Mike Holmgren was one of the best developers of quarterbacks the league has ever seen. I mean, he was the guy that took Brett Favre from very undisciplined gunslinger and turned him into a legend. So having Mike Holmgren was a huge part of that equation. Mike Holmgren was actually the mentor of Andy Reid. Andy Reid coached under Mike Holmgren in Green Bay. Holmgren was one of the great offensive coaches the league has ever seen. So that was an element to it. But yes, I absolutely think the team should be looking to draft a quarterback frequently. And I have nothing against the principle that you draft a quarterback every year. Just make it a bonus pick. Just trade down a time or two, add an extra pick, and use that to get a quarterback. So that way you're not depriving the rest of your team. That's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. If you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and you're listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Wednesday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.